Hi, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Doug, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus and a recovering sex addict. And this is episode 95, part B. Super excited to talk about the hope and the freedom. Not to steal from Milton Magnus there, I get to, who might have coined those terms together. But as we talk about part B, really looking at how do we start to find healing? How do we start to find recovery and really that process? So welcome back to the podcast, Chris. Thanks for not running away after part A.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I'm glad to be here, and I love part B way more than part A.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the one that is more fun to listen to and to feel, because there's a lot more positive emotion in that, and a lot. Sometimes it's easier. So when we're listening to part A, we can really identify with some really hard things, and so I'd encourage listeners, as you listen to part A, be good to yourself in knowing that there's going to be some hard things that may trigger some things in yourself, and find appropriate ways to handle those. But one of those is knowing that part B is there to offer that hope. So where we kind of left that cliffhanger of part A was that, kind of a lot hit the fan that you didn't expect to, that you had quote unquote, a good run of 6 months of being a good person, and really feeling like, hey, this change can happen without me bringing anything to the light, and then that just not being the case. And so we were talking about a friend that just said, hey, write this letter and make sure it's all in there. And so I guess that's the first question is, was it all in there? What did that look like? What was that process like?
I'll get to that. I think one of the things is, as I said, I hate part A is, I think one of the lines, I think one of the lines from Castimonia script is, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door. And I think is in the promises, right? And I don't think either my wife or I would ever want to go back and say we do it all over again the same way. But the fact that it led us to where we are today, it's incredible to be able to look at that phrase and think, yeah, I could see that. I can actually see that I wouldn't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it, because it does, that part A does lead me to the hope of part B, and the hope of part B starts because of Christ, right? And it actually started with the confrontation from my pastor, who said, I want you to do these three things. I want you to read this book, Shattered Vows. I want you to go home and tell your wife, and I want you to call Tim Abergeorge. And so Tim is my counselor to this day. CSAT, shout out to Tim. He's been
on the podcast.
He's been on the podcast. I'd say, I do not say it lightly, that he probably saved my life in a lot of ways. And so grateful for him. But this friend of mine, I'm writing it all out, and I'm writing out everything that I've done. And again, I would pause there and say, I don't necessarily recommend the process that I've gone through for any other man. Like, I would not recommend going home and telling my wife the way I told her. If I had to do all this over again, I would say, if I were my pastor, I would say to me, you need to go seek therapy and ask their advice on how the next steps on how to tell your wife. You need to get your wife into a counseling session, have one prepared for her so that she can go to see a counselor, a therapist once you disclose. Like, there's a lot of different things I would have, a lot of things I would have done differently, but just the way God was in all of this and how it worked out is just miraculous. Because like you said, like, my best friend didn't have the head knowledge of what he was asking me to do, but he knew just something, through the Holy Spirit told him, Chris, write it all out, leave nothing in the dark.
And how many days is this from, discovery day to disclosure day? And I think sometimes that space is really difficult.
Yeah. So September 18th, September 29th, 2018 is this closure. This happened probably around the 7th of October. So pretty close. Yeah, so it's kind of in that time frame. And I get emotional thinking about this next part, because what I would say, another thing that God provided in us and with that for us, was our best friends were never for one of us. They were for us. My wife never had one of her friends speak into her, you should leave the jerk. She never, nobody ever said that to her. They all said, we're for y'all and we want y'all to make it through this. And when I say they held us up, I mean that emotionally, spiritually, and literally physically. Because when my wife, I've told obviously much later, when my wife read that, what I just wrote out to her, she literally collapsed. And our best friends literally had to hold her up. And she had no idea, just the extent of my acting out and my deception and the lies.
How did that go? Was it just a letter you laid on a desk and she read by herself? Did you sit with her while she read it? Were there other people in the room? Like, what was that?
No. Yeah. So my best friend comes over and picks it up and takes it back to his house about a mile from where we live. And she read it in their kitchen, just the three of them, the husband, wife, and her. And like I said, she just literally physically collapsed. And I didn't know all this until months or maybe a year later, to be honest. But that was what I felt like was the beginning of the end. I was trying to figure out how to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I did not know how to get out of this. Like to say, you don't just say, just kidding, right? And, like none of this ever happened. I thought my marriage was over. I remember, going with my wife and meeting with her at our church, and we called out to this last affair partner, I'd say, and ended it over the phone with my wife listening. And said, my wife knows everything, we're leaving your name out of it. We'll never repeat your name to anyone, blah, blah, blah. And hang up. And I looked at my wife and I just said, I don't want you to feel like you have to stay with me for financial reasons. Like, I don't want you to be fearful of finances. So I'm telling you right now, I am turning everything over to you. All of our savings, every dollar in 401k, everything that we've saved through our investments, it's all yours. I'm literally pushing all of the chips to your side of the table and giving it all to you. And I'll sign whatever I need to sign to do so. And I did. I mean, I ended up, she went to an attorney. She wanted to call my bluff. Like, okay, you want to do that? And so I did. I signed it all over, and did not want her to ever have to make a decision of staying together for a financial reason. And so I think, for me, that went a long way in her ability to gain, start to build trust again. So now we're in, October, October 12th. They had disclosed to our kids, read to them what was happening, and just tragic, devastating.
Roughly, what are their ages here? I mean,
I had one's a freshman in college, senior in high school, and a sophomore in high school. So sophomore in high school, senior in high school, and freshman in college. And they were devastated. And all had, that's a totally different episode, right? Probably because just all the different personalities and how each of them handled it and what they went through and the rebuilding of those relationships. And, I just say briefly that God, thank God those relationships have been rebuilt and have never been better, to be honest. Just really cool to see what God's done in those relationships. And the beginning of that for me was even with my wife, where here I am out of the house until the day after Thanksgiving. And the only reason I was allowed to come home at Thanksgiving, nobody wanted me home, but we had both found independently, an intensive 3-day intensive with Milton Magnus. And I had reached out to my wife. Again, she's not even talking to me. She texts me every once in a while, typically pictures from the past or reminders of the past. And, just, you were a liar, you were a cheater, you were, this is not who you are, you're dead to me kind of stuff. And all of that really understood early on. My job was not to defend myself. My job was to hold the bucket. I realized early on, and much of this through therapy and relationships I'd made in Castimonia, and I'll get to that in a second, that my job right now is to hold the bucket. She wants to throw up on me all the pain that I've caused her. She wants me to feel that pain in some way that she's feeling. And thank God I had men in my life and counselors, therapists in my life who helped me understand that early on. So that was one of the things so Tim Maver-George, I reached out to Tim Maver-George, and he reached out. He calls me like on that Friday in October there, and he has a slot amazingly at the time that I could jump in at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. And so I meet with him, and he said, before you come though, I want you to go to this Castimonia meeting tomorrow morning. So we were talking on Friday night, go to this Castimonia meeting Saturday morning. I walk in expecting, to see in the parking lot a bunch of, vans with no windows that says free candy on the side, because, I never even knew what a sex addict was until my wife said, "You're a sex addict." And I was like, I'm not a pedophile. And I literally meant that seriously. Like I did not know, I did not know what that meant. And so I walk in this Castimonia meeting thinking, I'm, who am I going to run into,
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in, and shockingly, it was a bunch of people like me. And it's just amazing to me. And the relationships I've made and the friendships I've built through Castimonia, I never would have met these guys at a dinner party, because, some of our lives are we run in different circles. But some of the best friends I have to this day as a result of, going and finding men like me. Probably the best church I've been in, right? And I know it's not church, but it is the best community I've ever.
When you sit in a circle like that, that's real church.
It is church. Yeah, you're exactly
I've
right.
said on the podcast before, but it's so true that the men I know the best, the men that know me the best, the men that I identify with the most, I don't know half of their last names. Yeah. I don't know what they do for a living. Like, I don't know the names of their children, but they are like people that I would text if the walls were caving in on my house, or I would call. And so it's just super interesting that the superficial stuff goes away, and really you can find real connection with guys that have experienced the same thing. And like you said, they're really similar to us, and it's not, what we might picture from a bad public service announcement from the 70s or something.
Yeah. So this is a little bit, I guess disjointed, if you will, and it's been a while, but I remember talking to my pastor a few days after all this, and he said, I can't wait to hear your testimony, because this is going to be very unique how God brings you around. And I can't wait to see what God does in your life and in your life with Lisa. And he just had a lot of hope for us that right out of the gate. Tim had a ton of hope for us out of the gate. And one of the things I remember is I had probably a year and a half prior, I had shoulder surgery. And I had basically two surgeries in one with my left shoulder. And I remember when I got out of surgery, they put me in a sling that took my arm and locked it up, put basically the palm of my left hand on my right shoulder, and had me in this sling for 6 weeks, where it was just completely locked up. I was not allowed to move that arm at all. And so what I remember they did that because they wanted to lock that up, and then they wanted to use physical therapy to bring that back to normal. And so the reason they take you so far the other extreme is because they want you to work back to normal. They don't want to put you in normal, because if they put you at normal right after your surgery, you could get out of socket again, or you could have that injury again. So they bring you the full opposite way, right? They bring you to where you can't do anything with it, so they can use physical therapy to bring you back. And that actually hit me as I was starting this recovery, of which I wouldn't have called this recovery at the time, but as I started this recovery journey. So what I did was I got rid of everything out of my life that I could get rid of. I got off all social media, which I'm still off of all social media, except for one that I have to be on for work. I quit smoking cigars, which, I wasn't an addict with cigars, but that was something I enjoyed. I stopped drinking. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I stopped drinking. I stopped watching TV, any kind of sports. That the Astros were in the playoffs that year was killing me. Not to watch sports, but I was just like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing anything. And all I did was read recovery books, and went to recovery meetings. I was at a recovery meeting basically every day of the week. And I just started doing all the things to the extreme, right? So that I could use all of those things now to help me find what normal looks like. But I had to go to the extreme because if I just started acting in the normal, quote unquote, normal fashion, I don't think I could have made it, because I needed to get rid of all that stuff to find out what's in this, right? What am I doing? Where am I? And then as I start to get back and find what normal looks like, I can reintroduce some of those things as they see fit. I'll never be on social media again. Just for me, that's not going to happen. And quite honestly, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to get off all social media personally, but there's therefore no condemnation, but I would encourage you to do that.
I think that's an interesting concept as well, of just like getting that plate empty to then intentionally decide what's going on to that plate. Not just trying to get it back to a manageable size where maybe, because then you're just going to build it back in some bad ways, or whatever analogy you want to use. Probably use several on the podcast, but if you're redoing a deck that's rotten, just painting over it's not going to work. Like you're going to have to tear it down or tear parts of it down. And so when you can start back fresh and decide what you want to use, it's going to be long lasting and done the quote unquote right way.
Right. Yep. Exactly. That's a great example as well. Yeah. So, again, my wife and I both at the same time kind of found this 3-day intensive. We go see Milton Magnus, and all the while I'm doing Castimonia meetings left and right. I'm doing everyone that's available. And again, the men of Castimonia, just amazing how often I would receive a text at the right time, how often I would receive a call at just the right time. And they were just always there. They were just always present for me. And I always had someone I could reach out to. And that's what was so powerful about the initial stages of this recovery. I was a wreck. It's funny, when I talked to some guys that were with me in those first few meetings, and we laugh about it now. They're like, man, you were cross talking like crazy. You were crying like a maniac. You were a wreck. I'm like, yeah, I was, So my wife and I go to this 3-day intensive, and that's where, one of the things that I have to do is I have to write everything out, my entire sexual history from the time I was 18 until the present. And that culminates with, I'm sure, but he's listened to your podcast long enough to know that culminates with a polygraph to prove that I'm telling the truth. And so we spent those 3 days doing this intensive, together at times and then separately at times. And I remember my wife, we were just talking about this last night, actually. She said she remembers saying to Milton, she's like, I'm a black and white person, and I just don't see how I can make this work. I don't see how this is going to ever result in a healthy marriage. And he said to her, I understand that, but you have to remember that you believe in a God who is a redemptive God. He redeemed you. So he can redeem this.
Right.
And that really struck her. I mean, like 3 days, probably 6 months worth of therapy going on in those 3 days. And it's that like 3 sentences right there that he says to her that gave her the most hope of what we could have in our marriage. And man, I could tell you example after example of what God did through, different people that didn't even know our story that would say something to us and just resonate big time. And then people that would say, hey, I'm praying for you. I don't even know why, but I'm just praying for you. It's just crazy. And we had so many ups and downs. We take 10 steps forward and 37 steps back, 1 step forward and 12 steps back. And it was just constant, it was very up and down, and very painful for her. And being at home was really good. I was living in my study, my home office. I lived there for about 18 months. We were joking about this the other day, actually. And when you can joke about this and your oldest daughter is present, we're kind of laughing about this. It's like, my daughter was like, don't you remember he was living in the study? And she's like, oh yeah, that's right. And I was like, yeah, I was on an air mattress that had a hole in it. I had to air it up twice a night. And, they both laughed. Like, I don't care. I was glad you had to air it up,
Right.
And then you upgraded me to the sleeper sofa. And, so we talked about that. We kind of laugh about these things. And anyway, it's just cool how God has used some of these things to actually bring some humor and levity to our relationship now. But I remember one significant thing that happened is, so our April is our anniversary. So we're, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, whatever, 8 months, something like that later. And we're pretty much on the journey towards recovery, but here comes our anniversary and there's nothing to celebrate. And I just remember praying, like asking God, what does this look like? What should we do on this anniversary? And so God just gave me this picture. And so I went out behind my garage and I grabbed our fire pit and I built a big fire in April. And in Houston, it's about 95 degrees in April. So built this big fire in the fire pit, and I grabbed some 3x5 cards and went out with my wife, and we each had a pen. And I just said, I want us to each write on these 3x5 cards everything that we want out of our marriage, everything that we want to burn out of our marriage, that we want to get rid of, that we do not want to incorporate moving forward. And I want us to write it down, read it to the other, and then throw it in the fire. And that's now gone from our marriage. And we sat there for about 30 minutes and did that. And we cried together, and it was painful. A lot of things that she said were very painful, but they were leaving our marriage and they weren't going to be allowed in anymore. Probably one of the most pivotal parts of our recovery together was doing that act together. It was really, really, really powerful.
I like the symbolism in that, and just knowing that you're making a conscious effort to push it away, to take it away, to let God really do his work of taking it away. And I think there's so many ways to do that. And here in your part A and part B, there's several places where, the 12 steps, as we know, the 12 steps are at play and are working out. And that's a piece of those as well, of just being able to turn it over and say, I don't want this. And I'm going to turn my will over to God and let him do his thing. And I think that's a powerful piece. And I know we have spouses that listen to the show. It's not the intent of our show. It's not the premise of why we started or what we do. But we have a lot of spouses that listen, sometimes just to say, what is it really like from the mind of an addict? And then, is there really hope? And I think those are things that spouses can point to and say, I see true change. I see somebody that wants this out of their life. I'm not saying we don't slip or fall or things mess up here or there, but there's an intentional act of saying, this is not good for me, for us, and moving forward from that. So I just think that's beautiful.
Yeah. And, that actually, prompted me to think about a couple of things. One, the 12 steps. Like I thought 12-step programs were for people who really just needed Jesus, like that. This is a cultish kind of thing. Like, I get it. That's good for you that you do those things, that you find your higher power, whatever that is, I've got a higher power. His name's God. I don't need anything else. Well, how'd that work for me? Right. And so I started to talk to men, and as I started talking to men in Castimonia and really understand the 12 steps, I committed to doing them. And I committed to doing those 12 steps. And it was life-changing because of the process that I went through with those 12 steps. Really uncovered who I am, where my faults and flaws are, the people that I impacted, how to make things right with those people, how to make God first in my life, truly first in my life. And then seeing how all of that results in giving back, and being a part of a community that is continuing to invest in other men going through the same thing. It's a huge part of my recovery, is being part of the 12 steps. As a result of that, I am a part of, I'm one of the facilitators. So if you're listening, this is a shameless plug, 7 a.m. on Tuesdays, 7 a.m. Central Time on Tuesdays, and Friday noon Central Time, we have a Castimonia Zoom call. It's a telemeeting, not a video meeting, but it's telemeeting, and fantastic. Have guys coast to coast calling in. So it's really great. I encourage you to be there. Another thing that you said that really, I think if I were listening to this, whether I'm the husband or the wife, I would say both of you need counseling. That's probably the best thing that we did. Is my wife went to counseling and has been in counseling since, with someone who could help her through this journey. It wasn't just a standard counselor, someone who had experience in helping someone through, making it through an affair, making it through someone, a husband with sex addiction. And it has been a very powerful part with EMDR and just the therapy that she goes through. And honestly, Doug, we didn't even do couples counseling, right? We to this day have not done couples counseling because we really didn't need couples counseling as much as we needed both to be healthy. And so once we're both healthy, we can start to see how God can bring us together. I'm not saying we don't have our challenges, but it's most important for us to get healthy first.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that exact model that you just kind of talked about through counseling. My current counselor, he went to college, got his master's in marriage and family therapy. Like that is what his degree is in. I mean, since got other things, but he would say, I don't believe in marriage counseling. And I was like, that's your whole thing. Like that's your degree you hang on the wall. He's like, I think that, I can have two people sitting on a couch that are married, but we're not doing marriage therapy. We're doing individual therapy for each one. And the better that they become, the better that marriage is. And so, what he might say, or even what I might think, is that individual therapy, individual work probably takes us 98 to 99% of the way there. And there's some things we can work on in marriage counseling about communication, conversation, conflict resolution, but that's that final 1 to 2%. If we're both doing our work, like, wow, there's some big things that can happen.
Yeah. And it's the old triangle, right? Where, God is at the peak of the triangle and the husband is on one side of the bottom of the triangle and the wife on the other. What I find is getting across at the bottom is much more difficult than if I am doing my work to become closer to God and she's doing her work to become closer to God. If we're both doing that, the closer we come to God, if you follow that triangle up, the closer you become to one another. And so that's really been a huge part of our journey is individual therapy and really, really seeking God individually, as well as together. We pray together, obviously, but it's really been seeking that out. So
that's awesome.
Huge
and
part.
If you're listening to the podcast, you just missed out on some great visuals. He was drawing the triangle out with his hands. So sorry you're missing out on that. You just got to visualize what that may look like in your own world.
If you don't know what a triangle is, go back to geology. No, wait, that's not geology.
One of those subjects that I didn't do well in, probably. But I appreciate your candor, especially through part A and what it looks like in part B. You referenced 2018 as kind of that pivotal point. Just for the listener, it's 2023 right now. I don't know when you're listening to this. Maybe it's 2060. Who knows if there's podcasts that still exist that long. But if so, there's about 5 years between those. So there's a lot of time that has elapsed between those. And so you can now look back, and these things were giant mountains, you can kind of laugh about a little bit. And it doesn't make them light. It doesn't mean that they should have been joked at back in 2018, but it just shows that there's recovery under that road. And I think that's a beautiful thing as well. And my wife and I have some of those too, where we can joke about, being kind of coming back into the house and being upstairs and then being couch, and just that transition of what it looks like to get a little more trust and a little more things going on. And so I think that's a neat shared experience as well. I want to highlight one more thing, and then I'm going to come back to you, but I want to highlight one more thing, that some of our testimonies don't end with the part B that is marriage, right? That's the marriage stays together. I have really good friends in recovery, guys I sit in a circle with often, that it didn't end that way. But their part B is still beautiful. Their part B is still awesome. There's still a lot of hope and freedom in that. So sometimes we get in recovery because we want to save our marriage, right? That may be the sole reason we got in recovery. It's the sole reason I got in recovery. I'll say that. But guys find out that even if my marriage doesn't last, I like this recovery thing. Right? I like what it does for me as a human, as a father, as a brother, as a son, as a worker, whatever it may be. It makes us better in what we do. So I don't want you to feel like, okay, you were served with papers, a year ago, and you're like, well, this doesn't work for me because this isn't my part B, and it's not. But you have hope and freedom that's in there. So I want you to hear that clearly as well. That we really look at what God can do for you in your circumstances in your life, and it doesn't necessarily mean marriage or no marriage. And that's true for spouses that may be listening too. Maybe it doesn't mean that if you decide to divorce that you're doing something that's that's not right either. Every journey is different. And so that just needs to look like what's health for you and your spouse.
So true. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Doug. It's great.
So, Chris, what would you say to the listener that is driving along? They clicked on the wrong podcast and here they are listening to us. What would you say to them when they're like, man, this just seems like a bunch of hooey. I don't like who I am in my, they wouldn't call it an addiction, but who I am in this acting out, but I don't know how to change that. What would you say to that person?
Man, I think, it took time for me to become an addict. It takes time for me to recover as well. So just like it took time for you to become an addict, it will take time for you to go through recovery. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes work. It takes hard work. It takes an investment on your part. Sometimes a financial investment, but for sure a time investment, an emotional, spiritual investment. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I would say is just be willing to invest in your recovery. I think as I just kind of look back, the things that have helped me most and helped my wife and I most in this recovery process is I told her on December 5th, 2018, which is my sobriety date, 4 years plus now sober, that I would rather lose you than lie to you. I will not ever lie to you again. And that is an inner circle for me. I will break sobriety if I ever lie to my wife, and I will not ever lie to her again. I will not ever deceive her again. I will always tell the complete truth. And for us, again, just the miracle that, turned out is just on December 23rd, 2019, being able to ask my wife to marry me again. I re-proposed to her in the presence of my 3 kids and our 2 couples, best friends that were with us in this journey. And now, even to this day, doing a check-in every Sunday with my wife to tell her, that fast check-in, what I'm feeling, the activities I've been engaged in throughout the week, whether it's a Castimonia meeting or conversations with guys in recovery or my quiet time or church, or what kind of activities am I doing to make sure I'm on the road to continue recovery. And then checking in my sobriety date, confirming that it's still December 5th, 2018. And then just confessing to her any threats that I had, dealt with along throughout the week, and what tools and techniques I use to defend against those, because they still happen. It's not like I'm a robot. One of the things I tell guys in recovery is, I've got 4 years of sobriety, but I don't know if you've seen any car commercial. If you just push pause for a moment on your TV, when you see any car commercial, at the very beginning, at the very bottom, in small font, it says closed, a professional driver on a closed course, right? Every time. I am not that. I am not a professional recovery guy on a closed course. I'm living the same life. I'm living in the same world. I've got the same temptations. I've got the same quote unquote opportunities to fail and to stumble. So I'm just one of you. I'm just a guy trying to do recovery the best way that I can. And if there's hope for me, because I was an idiot, I did some stupid things, and I just really see hope for you. And so I would just tell anybody who's listening, there is hope. There is hope for you. And as Doug likes to say, you're not walking this journey alone. You're not alone in this. So seek out the help, find someone to reach out to. And again, even if it's this podcast, reaching out to Doug and George, and others that are on that email, just please reach out. So
absolutely. Great advice. And maybe we should make an episode about car commercials one time, because I always think of when they show the miles per gallon, and down the bottom, the small print says results may vary, right? So we don't promise one result here. Like what we promise is that what you put in, you're going to get out tenfold of that. Like you do the work and you do real work, you're going to get things from that. But I can't promise you what those things are. And it just looks different for every single person. But so results may vary, but they're going to be good results as you jump in. And just like Chris said, we are here for you at Purity Podcast at Castimonia.org. Reach out for any reason at all, or just to say, hey, this is a great topic. Have you ever thought about talking about this? Or I'd love to know more information about that. We get listeners that give us good suggestions that way as well. So again, Purity Podcast at Castimonia.org. But thank you, Chris. It's been a lot to me personally, just to have this time to have a couple conversations with you. And just thank you for your bravery and your ability to be transparent and put this out there.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and just encourage you and this journey, and just really appreciate the podcast, where you've brought it to, and things that you've done with this, and the men that you've reached and are impacting around the globe, to be honest. And anybody out there, just please seek recovery. You know, there is hope, and there are others that are going through similar things.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And even though you stole my tagline, I'm still going to say it again, that if you're out there on this journey of recovery, remember, you are not walking alone.